The trunk struck the attic floorboards with a sound like a coffin lid, and Eleanor Vance flinched, though no one was there to see it. She stood in the doorway of the room that was to be hers, a single candle guttering in her bare hand, and let her eyes travel across the low, sloping ceiling, the iron bedstead pushed against the wall, the small round window furred grey with dust and cobweb. Cold came up through the boards and into the soles of her slippers. Somewhere below her, 3 floors below, the great clock in the hall of Harrowden Hall struck 11, each note climbing the stairwell to find her here at the top of the house, where the servants themselves were not sent, where the wind moved in the rafters like something breathing. She had been the Duchess of Harrowden for exactly 9 hours. The housekeeper had led her up in silence, a taper trembling in her fist, her mouth pressed into a line that might have been pity, or might only have been fear of her master, and at the threshold, she had set down a jug of water and said, "His Grace's instruction, my lady. You are to sleep here." Then she had gone, and her footsteps had faded down flight after flight, until there was nothing left but the house, and the girl, and the cold. Eleanor set the candle on the sill. Her hands, she noticed distantly, were not quite steady, and she pressed them flat against the front of her wedding gown until they stilled. She would not weep. She had promised herself in the carriage, in the church, at the wretched wedding breakfast where the Duke had not once looked at her, that whatever else this marriage stripped from her, she would keep that. She would not give him her tears when she had already been made to give him everything else. Below, a door closed, firm, final, a sound with a man's temper in it. She crossed to the little window and rubbed a clear place in the grime with the heel of her palm. Far down, across the black sweep of the lawn, a single lit window burned gold in the east wing. His window. She watched it a long moment. This cold stranger to whom her father had sold her to settle a debt she had never incurred. And she wondered what a man could carry inside him that would make him marry a woman only to bury her in his own attic like a shameful thing. The candle hissed. Wind found the gap in the frame and slid cold fingers down her neck. She did not yet know his name for what it was. Not cruelty, she would learn, but a wound so old it had grown a wall around itself. She knew only that the golden window went dark, all at once, as though he had felt her watching, and in the sudden black she stood alone at the top of a house that did not want her, and understood that her life, whatever it was now to be, had begun. Morning came thin and reluctant through the round window, and Eleanor woke stiff with cold, still in her wedding gown, having not been able to bring herself to lie beneath the strange grey blankets. She went down. It seemed the only defiance left to her, to be seen, to walk the halls of the house that was, by law if by nothing else, now hers. The great staircase unwound beneath her hand, all cold marble and gilt. Portraits of dead Harrowdens watching her descend with the same grave grey eyes she had seen last night across an altar. At the foot of the stairs, a footman started at the sight of her and looked quickly away, as though she were something he had been told not to notice. She found the breakfast room by the smell of chocolate and toast, and she found him there. The Duke of Harrowden sat at the far end of a long table, a newspaper open in one hand, and he did not lower it when she entered. He was younger than the whispers had made him, perhaps 30, with dark hair swept back from a hard, handsome face, and a jaw that might have been cut from the same marble as his staircase. A scar, faint and old, traced the edge of one eyebrow. He wore black. He wore, she would come to understand, always black. "You are not in your room," he said, without looking at her. "I was not aware I was a prisoner in it." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Your Grace." Now the paper came down. His eyes met hers, and something moved behind them, quick and unreadable, before the shutter fell. Grey eyes, cold as the January window, and yet, for just an instant before he mastered it, startled, as though he had expected her to cower and she had not. "You will take your meals in your room," he said. "You will keep to the upper floors. You will not receive callers. You will not appear when I entertain. This house has a mistress in name only, madam, and you would do well to remember which name." He raised the paper again. "That is all." She stood very still. The chocolate steamed on the sideboard, untouched, meant plainly for no one. Behind her ribs something rose that was not quite courage and not quite grief. "You bought me," she said quietly. "The least you might do is look at me while you tell me I am furniture." The paper crackled. For a heartbeat, two, he did not move. Then, slowly, he set it down, and he looked at her, truly looked, the way a man looks at a thing he has been avoiding, and Eleanor felt the force of that gaze go through her like cold water, and had to lock her knees to keep from swaying. "I did not buy you, Duchess," he said, and his voice had changed, gone low and rough at the edges. "Your father sold you. There is a difference, though I grant it makes little enough to you." He rose. He was tall. The room seemed to shrink around him. "Go up, please." The last word cost him something. She saw it cross his face. "It is safer for us both. Safer." The word snagged in her as he passed her and was gone, the door swinging shut behind him, leaving her alone with the cooling chocolate and the watching portraits, and a question she could not put down. Safer from what? The days folded one into the next, grey and quiet, and Eleanor learned the shape of her captivity. She was not, in truth, ill-used. A tray came up 3 times a day, the food good if simple. A maid named Bess was sent to tend her fire, a round, kind-faced girl who at first would say nothing beyond "Yes, my lady," and "No, my lady," but who thawed, as the week went on, into something like company. It was from Bess, brushing out Eleanor's hair one evening by the attic fire, that the first thread of the truth came loose. "You mustn't think ill of him, my lady," Bess said suddenly, to the fire rather than to Eleanor. "His Grace, he weren't always like this. Cold, I mean. There was a time." She stopped, and her hands went still in Eleanor's hair. "Go on," Eleanor said, very gently. "It's not my place. Bess, I sleep in an attic in my own house. Whose place could it possibly be, if not mine?" The girl's reflection in the little glass wavered. "There was a lady," she said at last, so low Eleanor had to lean toward her. "Before, Miss Aveline, the daughter of a viscount, ever so beautiful, and he loved her. Everyone in the house knew it, the way he'd wait at the window for her carriage. They were to be married, and then," Bess swallowed. 3 days before the wedding she ran off, to France, with his own cousin, Mr. Fenwick, who'd been like a brother to him, took the betrothal ring off her finger and left it on his pillow with a note. "I never saw the note, but I saw his face after, my lady, and I never want to see a face like that again." That was 2 years past. He's not smiled since. He shut up the west drawing room where she used to sit, and no one's to go in. And he swore, one of the older footmen heard him, he swore he'd never be made a fool of by a woman again, that he'd marry when he had to, for the name, but he'd never. She broke off, colouring. He'd never let one near him, never let one in. The fire popped. Eleanor sat very still, the brush forgotten in Bess's hand, and felt the whole architecture of her situation shift and resettle into a new and terrible sense. He had not banished her to the attic because he hated her. He had banished her because he was afraid of her, of what a wife under his roof might come to be, of the door he had bricked up inside himself and dared not reopen. She was not being punished. She was being kept at a distance. A betrayed man had measured out in floors and staircases. "Thank you, Bess," she said, and her voice was not quite her own. That night, she did not watch his window. She lay awake beneath the grey blankets, listening to the wind in the rafters, and thought of a note left on a pillow, and a ring, and a man who waited at a window for a carriage that had carried his heart away to another country. And she was surprised, she who had every right to hate him, to find that what rose in her chest was not triumph at his weakness, but something perilously close to tenderness, and that frightened her more than the cold ever had. The storm came on the 10th night. It had been building all day, the sky over the estate bruising from grey to a sick green-black, the wind rising until the old house groaned in every joint. By evening the rain had come, not as rain but as a wall of water flung sideways against the walls, and the thunder walked across the moor toward Harrowden Hall, like something with intent. Eleanor could not sleep. She sat up in the attic with her shawl about her shoulders, watching the little round window flare white with each stroke of lightning, and it was during one of those white flares that she smelled it. Smoke. Not the clean smoke of a hearth. Something acrid, bitter, wrong. She was on her feet before she had decided to move. At the door, into the freezing passage, and there it was, a grey haze gathering along the ceiling, drifting up the stairwell from somewhere far below. Her heart slammed. A lamp, she thought wildly. A lamp overturned by the wind through an open casement, or a chimney fire in the storm, and the whole east wing where he slept lay in that direction. She did not think. She snatched up her candle and ran, down the servant's stair, down and down, her bare feet slapping the cold stone, the smoke thickening as she descended until her eyes streamed and her breath tore. The house was asleep. The servants' quarters lay in the far wing. There was no one but her and the crawling grey and the orange glow, now flickering along the base of the east passage, where a fallen lamp had caught a fold of curtain, and the curtain had caught the paneling. "Wake up!" she screamed, and her voice was swallowed by the thunder. "Fire! Wake up!" She reached his door and threw herself against it, and it was locked. Of course it was locked. He locked himself away from the whole world, and she beat on it with both fists, screaming his name, the name she had never once said aloud. "Harrowden! Julian! The house is burning! Wake up! Wake up!" The door wrenched open. He stood there in his shirt sleeves, hair wild, and for one instant, his face held only the raw animal confusion of a man dragged from sleep. Then the smoke reached him, and the glow, and something in him snapped taut and terribly awake. "The passage," she gasped. "A lamp. The curtains. The whole wing." He did not waste breath on questions. He seized her wrist, his hand hot and hard around it, the first time he had touched her, and even then, even in that, she felt it go through her, and he pulled her back from the flames, shouting for water, for the men, his voice cracking like the thunder itself through the burning house. They fought it together. There was no time for propriety, no time for floors and staircases and the careful distances of a ruined man. There was only the fire, and the two of them, and the servants, come stumbling at last from the far wing with buckets and blankets. He tore the burning curtains down with his bare hands and stamped them under his boots. She dragged a turkey rug across the flames, licking up the paneling, and beat at them until her arms had no strength left. The storm, which had lit the fire, at last helped drown it. Rain driving through the casement they smashed wide, the wind that had spread the flame now scattering the smoke. And then, all at once, it was over. The last ember hissed and died under a slosh of water. The passage stood black and streaming and reeking, and the servants leaned on one another and coughed, and the Duke of Harrowden turned in the ruin of his own house and looked at his wife. She was barely standing. Her nightgown was scorched at the hem and grey with ash, her dark hair fallen loose about a face streaked black, her bare feet cut and filthy on the wet stone. She had a burn across the back of one hand, angry and red, and she was shaking so hard she could not stop. He crossed to her, the servants melted back. And there, in the smoking dark, this cold man who had not touched her, had not looked at her, had hidden her in his attic, like a secret shame. He took her burned hand in both of his own, so gently it undid her, and turned it to the light, and stared at the wound as though it had been dealt to his own flesh. "You could have died," he said. His voice was wrecked. "You came down, into that, for me. You do not even—" He stopped. When he lifted his eyes to hers, they were not cold at all. They were wet and wide and utterly stripped of every wall he had spent 2 years building. "Why? After what I have, after the attic, after every cruelty, why would you come for me?" "Because no one should burn alone," she whispered. "Not even you." For a long moment, he only looked at her, holding her ruined hand against his chest, as though it were something holy, and she could feel the hard hammer of his heart beneath her fingers, faster than the storm. His thumb moved over her wrist, once, unbearably tender. His mouth opened. Whatever he meant to say, she never heard it, for the housekeeper came bustling with lamps and linen, and the moment shattered, and he stepped back and let her hand fall as though it had burned him. But he had held it, and they both knew, standing there in the wet black ruin, that something had broken open that could not be closed again. She was not sent back to the attic. By morning, the housekeeper had opened the finest guest chamber of the untouched south wing, a warm, high-ceilinged room with a fire already blazing and windows that looked over the rose garden, and no one said a word about whose instruction it had been. A physician came for her hand. Bess wept over the burn and dressed it with honey and linen, and a note came up on the breakfast tray, in a hard black slanting hand she had never seen before. Duchess, you will forgive me if I do not trust my own tongue this morning. I find I have a great many things to say to you, and no right to say any of them. Will you do me the honor of walking with me in the garden at noon? I will wait, whether you come or no. Harraden. She read it 4 times. Then she pressed it, absurdly, against her heart, and rang for Bess, and asked for the yellow morning gown, the pretty one she had not been permitted to wear. He was waiting at the sundial when she came out into the mild, bright day, and she saw him see her, saw something flare, and then carefully bank in his grey eyes, and he bowed, a real bow, deep, to her. Your hand, he said. Does it pain you? Less than yesterday. It will mend. They walked. For a long while he said nothing at all, and she let the silence be, and the roses nodded, and the fountain played, and slowly, haltingly, like a man learning again to use a limb long bound, he began to speak, not of the fire, of himself, of a girl named Aveline he had loved past all sense, and a cousin he had trusted like a brother, and a ring left on a pillow with a note he could still recite word for word, though he had burned it. Of the 2 years he had spent turning himself to stone, so that nothing could ever reach in and do that to him again. I told myself I would marry for the name and nothing more, he said, stopping beside the sundial, his knuckles white on the warm stone. That I would keep my wife at such a distance she could never, that I would never again hand another soul the whip to flay me with. And I put you in the attic, and I told myself it was prudence. He turned to her, and his face was open, agonized, unguarded. It was cowardice. You came down through fire, for a man who had given you nothing but cold, and I have never in my life been so ashamed, nor so, his voice failed. Eleanor, I have forgotten how to say the rest. I have been alone inside myself so long. She reached up, she who had promised never to give him anything, and laid her healing hand against his jaw, over the old scar, and felt him go utterly still. Then say it slowly, she murmured. I find I am in no hurry to be anywhere but here. His breath left him. His hand came up to cover hers, warm and shaking, pressing it harder against his face, and for one breathless, suspended moment, the whole distance of floors and staircases and 2 ruined years narrowed to the space between his mouth and hers, and the crunch of carriage wheels on the drive broke them apart. A visitor at Harraden Hall was rare as snow in June, and Eleanor turned toward the sound with her heart still racing, to see a smart travelling chaise draw up before the steps, and a woman step down from it. Golden-haired, exquisite, gowned in the first stare of Paris fashion, who looked up at the great house with the ease of one returning somewhere she had every right to be. Beside her, Eleanor felt the Duke turn to stone in an instant. All the warmth of a moment passed frozen out of him between one breath and the next. Aveline, he said. The name dropped between them like the coffin lid sound of a trunk on an attic floor. The golden woman crossed the gravel with a radiant, practiced smile, drawing off her gloves. Julian, she said warmly, as though no 2 years and no note on a pillow lay between them. You look well. Older. It suits you. Her bright eyes flicked to Eleanor, the honey and linen bandage, the borrowed yellow gown, and dismissed her in a single downward sweep. And this is the little wife I've been hearing of. How quaint. Julian, I must speak with you, alone. Fenwick and I have, that is, I have made a dreadful mistake, and I have come a very long way to unmake it. She laid her bare hand flat on the Duke's chest, over the very place where Eleanor had felt his heart hammer in the dark. I came back for you. Eleanor could not breathe. Here it was. The fear he had bricked himself away against, made flesh, and standing on his steps in Paris silk. She watched the woman's hand on his chest and waited for the wall to come down again, for the cold to close over him, for the attic to reclaim her, and she understood. in a rush of terrible clarity, exactly how much she stood to lose, and that she had not even known she loved him until the instant she saw him about to be taken away. "You will forgive me," the Duke said. He lifted Aveline's hand from his chest, not roughly, but with a finality that was worse than roughness, and set it from him. "You are wet from the road," he went on, "and you will want refreshment before you go, and my housekeeper will see to it. But you will not speak to me alone, madam, now or ever. There is nothing you carried away from this house that I have not learned, since, to live better without." He turned from the beautiful woman as though she were a portrait in a corridor and held out his hand, his bare hand, to Eleanor. "Come inside," he said, low, only to her. "You will take a chill." And Eleanor, trembling, put her bare hand into his, in full view of them all, and let the door of the great house close behind the two of them, and left Aveline standing alone on the gravel in her Paris silk, with the rain beginning, once more, to fall. But it was not so simply done, and Eleanor lay awake that night knowing it. Aveline did not go. She took a room at the inn in the village, and she began, with the patient venom of a woman scorned before witnesses, to talk. And what she talked was ruin. Within 3 days, it was all through the county, that the Duke of Harrowden had been trapped into a shameful marriage by a debtor's daughter, a nobody, a scheming girl who had wormed into a great house and locked its master away from the woman who truly loved him. That the fire, Eleanor's own courage, had been a plot, a piece of cunning, the whole thing staged to bind him with gratitude. The story ran the way ugly stories do, downhill and fast, and by the end of the week, an invitation to the county's grandest event of the season, the Marchioness of Danby's Autumn Ball, arrived at Harrowden Hall, so stiff with reluctance that its very ink seemed to sneer. "We will not go," Eleanor said. "Let them talk. It cannot touch us here. It can, and it will, and it must be answered." The Duke stood at the window of the south drawing room, the fine one, opened again to the light, where they now sat together each evening. "If we hide, we hand her the victory. She will have proved her story true, that I am ashamed of you, that I keep you locked away. That was ever her gift, Eleanor, to make the world believe the thing she wished true." He turned. "I hid you once. I will not do it again, and I will not let her make it seem I do. You will come to the Danby ball on my arm, as my wife and my Duchess, and the whole county will see how a Harrowden regards the woman he married. They will cut me," she said quietly. "They will stare, and whisper, and turn their backs. Then let them turn their backs," he said, "on both of us at once." And so on the night of the ball, she stood at the top of the great staircase of Danby House, in a gown of deep sapphire, her burned hand healed to a faint pink seam she no longer troubled to hide, and every head in that gilded, blazing chandelier-hot ballroom turned to look at the scandalous Duchess of Harrowden, and the whispering rose like the hiss of the fire, and the ranks of silk and jewels closed cold against her, and somewhere in that glittering crowd she knew Aveline waited, golden and triumphant, for her to break. At the foot of the stairs, the Duke was waiting, his hand held out, and Eleanor took a breath and began, into all of it, to descend. The ballroom parted before them like cold water, and closed behind them just as cold. She felt the cuts land one by one, the ladies who turned their painted shoulders, the dowagers who lifted their lorgnettes and looked away, the sudden pockets of silence that opened wherever she and the Duke passed, and sealed with whispering the moment their backs were turned. Aveline held court by the great fireplace, in shimmering white, a knot of the county's finest about her, and Eleanor did not have to hear the words, to read the story in the sidelong glances thrown her way. The Duke's hand was steady at the small of her back. "Steady," he murmured. "Do not give them your face. Give them mine." The music struck up. The first set, a waltz, that scandalous new dance the patronesses still frowned upon, and the Duke of Harrowden, who had not danced in 2 years, who had not been seen to smile since a note was left upon his pillow, stopped in the dead center of the Marchioness of Danby's ballroom, beneath the largest chandelier in the county, and turned to his wife and bowed. "Dance with me," he said, not low, not private, clear and carrying, so that the nearest ranks of the ton fell silent to hear it. before all of them. "Dance with me, Eleanor." She put her hand in his. He drew her out into the empty floor, utterly empty, every other couple frozen at the edges, watching. And he set his bare hand at her waist, and the music took them, and they turned alone, under the blazing lights, with 300 pairs of eyes upon them. "They are all watching," she breathed. "Good," he said. "I want them to." And then, still turning her, his eyes never leaving her face, he raised his voice so that it filled the whole silent room like a bell. "I have heard the story that is being told of my wife," he said, "to the ballroom, to the county, to the golden woman in white by the fire, that she trapped me, that she schemed, that she keeps me from a love I truly bear elsewhere." He turned Eleanor slowly through the frozen crowd, and his voice did not shake. "Hear the truth from the only man with the right to tell it. This woman came down through fire for me, when I had given her nothing but cold. She had every cause to let me burn, and she chose instead to save a man who did not deserve saving. I married her for a debt." "I love her," the word rang out, and somewhere a lady gasped. "For herself. There is no woman living who holds any part of my heart but the one in my arms. And any soul in this room who says otherwise, says it of the Duchess of Harraden, and will answer for it to me." The silence rang. By the fireplace, the golden woman in white had gone very still, and then, slowly, her chin high and her smile fixed like something painted on, she gathered her skirts and swept from the ballroom, and the crowd that had been hers turned, one by one, to watch her go, and then turned back to the couple dancing alone beneath the chandelier. And Eleanor, her eyes swimming, her heart too full for her body to hold, looked up into the face of the man who had once hidden her in an attic and now declared her before the world, and she did not care that 300 people watched. She lifted her healed hand and laid it against his scarred brow, and he turned his face into her palm, and the whole cruel county saw the Duke of Harraden close his eyes like a man come home at last. They were married a second time, not in law. The law had bound them long since, but in the small stone chapel on the Harraden grounds, before God and the household and no one else, on a golden morning when the frost had just left the grass. They said the vows over again in their own words this time, and meant every one. And when the Duke slipped a plain gold band onto her finger, it was not the one that had once lain on a pillow, that ring he had thrown into the sea, he told her, the very morning after the ball, and stood on the cliff and watched it sink, and felt, for the first time in 2 years, that his hands were clean. The county, in the way of the county, forgave them almost at once, for the world loves nothing so well as a great man in love, and by winter there was not a drawing room in 3 shires that did not boast of having always known the Duchess of Harraden was the making of him. The doors of the great house were flung open. The west drawing room, so long sealed, was aired and dusted and thrown wide, and Eleanor filled it with music and firelight, and the coming and going of friends, and the ghost that had lived there so long simply, quietly, ceased to be. The attic became a nursery. That was Eleanor's doing, and she never told him quite why she chose that room of all the rooms in that great house. The low sloping ceiling, the round window she had once rubbed clear with the heel of her hand to watch his lonely golden light. She only had it painted the color of a spring sky and filled with warmth, and when in time a small dark-haired child slept beneath that round window where his mother had once shivered alone, the Duke of Harraden would climb all those stairs to the top of his own house each night to stand in the doorway and watch them both, and marvel, and be afraid of nothing at all. The seasons turned, balls and gardens and long firelit evenings. A second child, a girl this time, with her father's grave grey eyes and her mother's stubborn chin. The slow gold accumulation of an ordinary happiness that neither of them had ever dared believe was meant for them. He learned to smile again, and then to laugh, and the sound of it in the halls of Harraden Hall was so strange to the old servants that Bess, now the housekeeper, wept the first time she heard it. And on winter nights, when the wind moved in the rafters, as it had on the night the house nearly burned, he would reach for her in the dark, simply to be sure she was there. Years on a bright cold morning much like the one on which they had said their second vows, Eleanor stood at the window of the great south drawing room and watched her husband cross the frosted lawn with their daughter riding on his shoulders, and she thought of the girl in the wedding gown who had stood alone at the top of this house and promised not to weep. She would not have believed it, that girl. She would not have believed that the cold stranger who buried her in his attic carried a wound the exact shape of her own loneliness, and that the fire meant to destroy them would be the thing that burned the wall between them down. She would not have believed a man could learn to open a door he had bricked shut, or that a hand once left empty could be, in the end, so full. He came in stamping the cold from his boots, their daughter shrieking with laughter, and he crossed the room to her and, as he did every morning, as he would do, she knew now, every morning of their lives, he lifted her hand, her right hand, with its faint pink seam, and pressed his lips to the old burn as though to a relic. "You are cold," he said. "You are always at this window." "I like to watch for you," she said. "I always have, even when I did not know it." He smiled, the slow, real smile she had waited a whole winter to earn, and drew her bare hand into both of his, warm and sure, and did not let it go. "And here, my dear listener, by the fire where you and I have sat together through the whole of it, I will leave them." His bare hand closed over hers, the morning light gold on the frost, a house that once locked love away, now filled to the rafters with it. "I have always believed that the coldest people are only the ones who have been most deeply hurt, and that behind the highest wall there is so often a soul simply waiting, terrified, to be reached. Do you believe it too? Tell me, if you had been Eleanor, standing at the top of that cold house on your wedding night, would you have found the courage to run down through the fire? I should so love to know your heart. Stay a while with me by this fire, won't you? Leave your thoughts below and subscribe, so that when I light the candle again and open the next of these old, tender stories, you will be here beside me to hear it.